So welcome back for week 5 of AP Research. What we're going to deal with this week is dealing with questions and how we are going to deal with answering those questions. So a lot of this is going to be rehashed, but you'll see. I apologize also for the lateness of this video. Last week was a fun week. So if you have a question, you have a good question because it has 3 things, and we've dealt with this in class because you refined your own questions by giving yourself some feedback. So you know what type of question you're asking. We know the domains. So the type of question, so you're being nitpicky as to what you're dealing with. Domain, so I know that we're dealing with math or something like that. And then I know you're trying to create a product or something along those lines. So we know whereabouts you're hoping to ask your questions. The goal, however, is not to answer that question, because that question might already exist. What we are seeking is what we would call a knowledge gap. So, of course, you have to have mind the gap in there. So the only way you can find these questions is by reading a lot about a topic. So it helps if you have a question and it's nitpicky, because what that's doing is it's narrowing down what you need to look at. Because now what you have to do, now that you have an idea as to if you want to do a qualitative study or a quantitative study where you're going to explore the relationship between X, Y, and Z, and it happens to fit under sociology, what you now need to do is start hunting down articles that pertain to everything you just said and looking at, so what do we know, but also by knowing what we know, there's going to be a glaring hole that you're going to start to notice of, wait a second, how come they never talk about this? And then you hunt to see if that has been addressed. And if you can't find that, congratulations. You found the knowledge gap, and now you have a question. So typically you come up with an idea as to what you would like to talk about. So by coming up with your initial questions, you're coming up with, here's what I need to little R research, just read about. And again, we talked about how you should be reading papers. Use that to figure out, oh, wait a second, we have a gap in our knowledge, hence the research gap or the knowledge gap. And that is what you use to generate your question. And hopefully the question that you answer is specific in terms of what you're measuring and who you're going to be measuring it off of and what domain it falls under and if you're going to be explaining, exploring, or creating. The catch is the question that you ask off of that knowledge gap, you need to be able to answer that question. So if you can't answer it, you need to pick a different question, because you're going to get very frustrated very quickly if you come up with something that you have no way of answering. Because one of the things that we need to be checking early on is, are your methods actually going to answer your question? Are your data going to be able to answer your question? Because if the answer is no, it's either you need to start over or you need to be asking a different question. One of the things that you can do is it's perfectly okay to challenge what someone else does, or you can attempt to validate, although validation issues aren't as exciting, and we're not aiming for validation studies, meaning, oh, this one paper said that this is a relationship, therefore I'm going to test it out. We're not aiming for those, although they do exist. Your goal is to see if you can fill in a gap. And it could be one study did this, looked at this particular phenomenon with teenagers, but they were all white teenagers. So I'm going to try it with a mixed group of teenagers or something like that. Okay, well, that's answering a different question. Perfectly fair game. So that also could be dealing with the assumptions, because they could have, in a paper that dealt with teenagers, of, they're assuming all teenagers behave this way, but not all teenagers happen to have the exact same socioeconomic upbringing and background. Therefore, I'm looking at it from a different angle. That, perfectly legit to do. For validation studies, I'm definitely not going to play you this. I just want to point it out. There's a guy named John Oliver, and he did a video about, it was last year, so in 2016, I believe, dealing with validation studies in science. So obviously if you're not doing science details, but the way that it all works turns out to be pretty much the same. There's lots of expletives, which is why I can't show this to you. I'm just pointing out that it exists. But so if you go and look on the presentation, this slide will not be here. but it's a very good one because it comments on the importance of validation. The catch is we're not aiming for validation in this class.